On the Young Turks today, we talked about how there's not enough people fighting for the poor, and I wanted to bring on a guest here at Rebel headquarters who has a storied and excellent history of doing just that, and probably one of the guys in the country that has done that more successfully than almost anyone else. And he's an incredible organizer as well. His name is Sam Daley-Harris. His latest book is Reclaiming Our Democracy, Healing the Break Between the People and Government. Sam, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you.
All right, great to have you on. Before we get to how people can organize, which is a lot of what you're doing lately and what you've helped other progressive groups to do and to learn from, I actually want to talk about the Microcredit Summit campaign that you started or helped to initiate back in 1995. What was that, and can you tell us about the results of that?
Well, let me just go back a little farther. We first met Muhammad Yunus of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh in 1985 and did legislation in 87, and he joined our board in 88. So we go way back with that. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 06 for his work. And we just wanted to see how broadly we could expand microloans for the poor, especially women. And the goal was reaching 100 million of the world's poorest families, especially the women of those families, within a 10-year period. And we surpassed the goal 2 years late, but it's a funny field. You know, some of it's gone off the road in terms of really paying more attention to the donors, but others of it is incredible and really focuses on the well-being of the women and the clients, and they're moving out of poverty. It's a miraculous field with some funniness involved too.
So Sam, 100 million people ain't no joke. So I just want the audience to get a sense of, so what happens when they get a microloan, and what are the positive effects that reverberate from that?
Well, the original story of Yunus starting Grameen Bank is a long story. There's a famine in his country. He meets a woman who's making bamboo stools for sitting on. This is 76. He says, how much money profit do you make every day? She says, 2 pennies a day profit. How's that possible? It's a beautiful stool. She said, well, I don't have the money to buy the stool. I have to borrow it from a moneylender and then sell it back to him at a price he sets. So he has a student go around the village and find out who else is in the same condition. And they find about like 30 people who need a grand total of like $24 to get off of those money lenders. And this woman goes from 2 pennies a day profit in the mid 70s to $1.25 a day immediately, because she could sell it to the highest bidder. So that's really like at the beginning and some example of like breaking the chains of servitude, really.
Yeah, so you founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results. That was 38 years ago. You also founded Civic Courage back in 2012. And now you coach groups like Citizens Climate Lobby. So what have you, I mean, I know that you've written a lot about this. Obviously you wrote a book about it and you talk about it all the time. But to the best of your ability to summarize it, what have you learned about organizing that you are now teaching other progressive groups?
Let me just share a quote from Francis Moore Lappé, who said, our real problem is not a heating planet or rampant malnutrition. We only have one real problem, our own feelings of powerlessness to manifest the solutions right in front of our noses. So my gig is to help groups create structures of support that can dissolve the powerlessness. Or said one other way, if you've got 30 people in the room and you want to start a chapter of an organization and 15 raise their hand and they say, I'm in what? What did they promise to the organization? What did the organization promise to them? And is it powerful? And so the groups I work with, when you're in, there's a monthly conference call with guest speakers and Q&A, and there's a little training on the call, and there's a monthly action. And people move really from kindergarten to first, third, ninth, 12th grade and beyond as activists.
So let me dive into that a little bit more. If you're, and not only progressives watch this show, but sometimes progressive leaders watch it. And so if you're starting up a group and you want volunteers, as an example, should you start out with big ass or small ass? And should you keep on asking for things, or is that going to wear them out? These are questions that almost anybody who starts a group has.
Yeah. So I'll use the word big ass, but it has to add up to something. So for example, with the groups I coach, if they're, let's say, 30 in the room and 15 join the chapter, they know that the first thing they're going to do is take a 4-part new group training. That's a big ask, 4 weeks in a row or every 2 weeks. But if at the end of the 4-part new group training, people are getting face to face with their member of Congress or writing their first letter to the editor, it was a big ask, but it's beginning to add up to something. So I think most groups are afraid of making big asks, or if they do, they don't deliver much to the volunteers they're asking big things of.
What do you mean by not delivering to the volunteers? Like, what would be a way of delivering to the volunteers if you're in the organization?
Well, let me just give you an example. I spoke to the head of a nonprofit. It's a group like CARE, Save the Children, Oxfam, Catholic Relief Services. And he said to me, we can't have our volunteers write letters to the editor or op-eds because they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization. Well, one of the groups I coach is Citizens Climate Lobby, and their volunteers had over 4,000 letters, op-eds, and editorials published last year. One group saying they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization. The other group saying, what do we got to do to make sure they don't get it wrong, and end up in their case with 4,000 letters, op-eds, when in 2010 their volunteers had 65. Now they're feeding power to their volunteers. They're saying your voice matters and it can be published in the paper and more.
Okay, so power to the volunteers, at least they begin to see the results of their actions. So when people ask for volunteers, what percentage of the people who just raise their hand immediately wind up staying on, and what percentage fall off? Because people might not realize, if they've never run an organization, that most of the volunteers, or a lot of them, do fall off.
Yeah, well, for starters, a lot of times when people raise their hand, it's not clear what they raise their hand for. I mean, it sounds good, but I'm not exactly sure what they're asking me to do. So that's a first problem. And second, if they do know what they're signing on for, but it doesn't feed them much power, they don't grow much from the first month or the first 2 months or the first 5 months, then that's another reason people fall off. It's not like the groups that I work, nobody falls off. They do, but there's less fall off because more's going on.
So what is it that you think the volunteers are looking for when they sign up for any group, and certainly for progressive groups?
Yeah, well, they want to matter. They want their voice to matter. They want to be heard. They want to make a difference. And is what we're feeding them and what we're providing them and what we're asking them to do add up to that? Maybe it adds up to it a tiny bit. Maybe it adds up to that a lot. Maybe not much at all.
Right, and that makes sense. And that's and if they're volunteering their time, and time's a precious commodity, that's the least they can ask for, is to make sure that it's relevant and that it makes a difference. So now the name of the book is Reclaiming Our Democracy, Healing the Break Between the People and Government. So let me go back to that and ask another macro question. So how do we heal that break? Because there definitely exists a break right now. I don't think government represents the people at all, especially at the national level.
Yeah, well, I love this quote by Lawrence Lessig, who said, we did a poll, found that 96% of Americans want money out of politics, but 91% said it isn't possible. That's the politics of resignation. But if we can find a way to thaw the resignation, we can find a way of winning. So how do you heal the break is your question. And the answer for me is help people get in action. In other words, when Citizen Climate Lobby volunteers had 1,600 meetings with members of Congress or their staff last year, that's 1,600 real possible healing the breaks kind of thing. When they had 4,000 plus letters, op-eds, and editorials, that's 4,000 plus healing the breaks, because people in action are disproving their notion that they don't matter. They're disproving their fear that their voice won't ever be heard. And so I think that's a key aspect of the healing the break question.
Right. There's so much to talk about. We're out of time here, though, but I want people to at least be able to go to civiccourage.org and reclaimingourdemocracy.org to be able to find out more about Sam Daley-Harris's work. And Sam, I want to again thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
It's an honor. Thanks.